Hi everyone, welcome to my next video. I'm going to tell you how I retired when I was almost broke. In fact, I was broke when I retired. And I am a firm believer that despite difficulties, we can overcome almost most of them. And I say this because I've had so many difficulties in my life that I have overcome, many of which I didn't think I ever would. And I have learned that it's all about our mindset. That despite what's going on, we have to keep forging ahead and believe in possibilities. And I've talked about that before. And one reason I enjoy my channel so much is because I want to use all of my failures, all of my struggles, and all of my successes to offer thoughts, inspiration, ideas, and things to consider if things are similarly going on in your life. So here's the story of how I retired when I was broke, because I was. I'm going to talk about this in future videos, especially if you're interested, but I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder in 1990. And I talked about this in my memoir, I See the Elephant. And I have a lot to say about PTSD, but I'm not going to address that in today's video. But I have my own version of what I think that is, and how people view that today. Now, I was on disability, which was my only source of income when I left my first husband. And it was very modest. So, when I was 60 years old, I had made a very bad financial decision to buy a farm in New Hampshire that I could, in reality, could not afford. And I'm going to talk about this topic in future videos also, because that was quite an experience, buying what I wanted rather than what I could afford. Because after 10 years of trying to keep up and refinancing, becoming more and more in debt, I eventually lost that property to foreclosure. And it was very sad because I had built the barn myself. I had to find homes for my horses, and I had to move on, which I did. So I took Maggie, and I bought myself a camping trailer. And while my credit was still good, I bought a brand new Ford F-250. And I took off, and I traveled the United States for 2 years, thinking that was the answer. Because even though all I had was my disability, I could live on that. And I would live out on Bureau of Land Management land out west for free. And I had been captivated by all the full-time RVer YouTube videos, and I thought, what a great way to live. I can do that. So we got to Kansas, and I found Sheppy in a shelter. He was only 6 weeks or 3 months old, I can't remember. Pretty small, miserable, tiny little dog. And I scooped him up in my arms, and we brought him with us. So it was just me, Sheppy, and Maggie, and we drove all over the U.S., and I decided that I hated it. Well, I came back to, I believe I was in, I can't remember where I was, but I was somewhere on the East Coast, and I had put the dogs with me in my kayak, trying to cheer myself up, and we found a little sandy beach, and I let the dogs out, and they were having the most wonderful time running on the beach. And I just stood there crying, and I thought, I hate this. I don't want to be moving around constantly. I want my own home. And so I kneeled in the sand, and I prayed, and I said, Dear God, all I want is a roof over my head, a front door, a mailbox, and a couple of windows. I need to start over. I want a home wherever it is, but I'm broke. How am I going to do this? And I felt so lost because sometimes people love the nomadic lifestyle, and I admire them for that. But for my personality, I didn't like it. I wanted a home base, and I wanted to go back to New England. And I thought of Maine. Even though I had never been to Maine, I knew I could find something affordable way up north in Maine. Well, I found a very, very cheap campground. It was December, off-season, and my campground site was only $5 a night, which was amazing. And I was determined that I was going to eat as cheaply as I can. Tuna sandwiches. Of course, treat the dogs the same dog food. But I was going to eat macaroni and cheese, ramen noodles, and whatever it took to save as much money, because come hell or high water, I was going to find a house. Well, living off-grid was not challenging to me, and I started looking for off-grid properties. Because camping, I knew how to use my solar panel to charge my battery. I loved being outside anyway, and I knew I wouldn't have a problem living off-grid. So I found a little cabin in northern Maine, not this one. I lived somewhere else before, which I haven't mentioned. A little red cabin on 12 acres, inland from here, good distance, in northern Maine, for sale for $30,000. And it looked good from the outside. But on the inside, apparently they hadn't lived there in over 20 years. The furniture was still there. But it was ugly, it was horrendous. But it had a roof, it had a front door, it had a mailbox, and it had windows, and I thought, what the heck, I'm gonna buy that place. Wow, all I had was $5,000. And it offered seller financing, because my credit had been trashed from my foreclosure from the farm in New Hampshire. And I'd also filed bankruptcy, was completely wiped out all my debt. So on paper, no bank was going to touch me. Yet I knew that even though I had bad credit and no money, I was going to find a house. And so I called the realtor and I said, I want to buy it. Here's my offer. And he said, well, Barbara, you're $1,000 short for closing costs. And you really do need to come and see it. And I said, I can't do that because I'm about 1,000 miles away. And it's the middle of winter. And I can't drive in the snow, pulling the 20-foot camper. So just give them my offer. And I do need seller financing. And tell them I'll buy it sight unseen. Well, why did I do that? Because I was desperate. And because I was going to make it work somehow, even if I only lived there a little while. It was the starting point that I needed. Called me back the next day. The seller had accepted my offer, and I was excited, but I still needed $1,000 for closing costs. Well, closing wasn't for another month. So, I think I lived on crackers and peanut butter just to save that extra $1,000. And when the closing date drew close, I said to the realtor, I'll be there in 3 days. And I packed up and I drove almost non-stop to Maine. And I believe it was snowing the day I got there. Quite a bit of snow on the ground. But I grew up in New Hampshire. I knew how to drive in the snow. I was concerned pulling my trailer. But I had four-wheel drive, and I was determined, and I was going to do it, and I did. I went to the closing office, and I signed the papers, still not having seen this property at all. And the realtor thought I was out of my mind. But I said, you don't understand. I'm desperate. However bad it is, it's got a roof, it's got a front door. And it's even got furniture, even though I hate it. And it's got a wood stove. So I'm going to make it work. So I found someone to bring me some firewood, which she delivered on a snowmobile. And I drove through the snow, and I got to that property. Now, from the outside, it looked really cute. It was a little one-bedroom, painted red with white trim, which is my favorite. If I ever have a barn, that's what I want. And that's how I painted my barn in New Hampshire, red with white trim. But the minute I stepped inside, I think I did cry, because it was awful. The furniture was worse, and it appeared in the pictures. But I lit a fire, and I heaved a sigh of relief, because at least I had a place to stay, right? Now this was back in, let's see. Was it 2018? I think it was 2018 or 2017. Sheppy and Maggie didn't like it there either. I think because they picked up, my sense that I hated it too. But it had a little screened-in porch. It was very remote. 12 acres of woods. And oddly enough, the logger, who needed to access his property beyond mine, plowed it for free. For the 2 years I lived there. My mortgage payment was only $300 a month, which meant I could save money. And even though I hated it, I told myself it was a stepping stone to where I was ultimately going to go. So I had my disability payment, which was, I think, $1,500 a month. It's all I had. And I made it work for 2 years. Now something amazing happened 2 years later. And this is now 2019 in December, when the interest rates dropped to 3%. And all of a sudden people wanted to come up and buy property in Maine, especially camps. And I thought, maybe this is my way out. Maybe I should list this place, because I really want to live on the ocean. Off-grid, but I miss the ocean. I miss walking on the beach. I want to hear the seagulls again. So I called a local realtor, and I asked him, "What do you think? What are the chances of selling this place?" And he said, "Barbara, I could sell it in a day." So I listed it. I listed my little nothing cabin with nothing special on 12 acres for way more than I bought it for. And I had competing offers in 3 days. And I was shocked. So between the highest bid that I took, the equity that I had built, and the money that I had saved, I also had a very peculiar and amazing experience that I had talked about when I had a dream about my mom. And I had not seen her in over 10 years. And I don't remember what that video was called, but I had a dream that her condo was for sale. And 5 days later, I looked online. And yes, indeed, her condo had been for sale. And actually had been placed on the market the very night I had had that dream. And to make a long story short, I found out my mother was in a nursing home at age 92 with failing health, and I was able to see her one last time. And even though she had disinherited me, my friend Peter gifted me an inheritance. And with all of these combining factors, I was able to buy the cabin I'm in now. Now, I don't know if, not having received any inheritance, if I still would have been able to purchase this property. I probably would have. I would have had less of a down payment. But I still think I would have made it work. Because I believe, and I know, that when you're very intent on what it is that you want, you will find a way to create that thing to become manifested. And I've talked about this also in the past. And so these series of events all occurred because of my intention. And I also know and believe that the way I prayed on that beach when I was so miserable and so sad and missing New England, my prayer had been answered. And all of these things had been set in motion to enable me to find this home, right smack on the ocean in northern Maine. Now, isn't that an amazing story? And I had no money, and I read about and watch videos about people who are so concerned about having enough money to retire. And I get it, not everyone wants to live off grid. But I'm not sure what everybody needs all this money for anyway. And the focus of this video is that if you can't afford to live where you are, such as how I lost my property in New Hampshire, it's best to part ways with it and don't let it drag you down any further. Because I was throwing money on that mortgage in New Hampshire, getting deeper and deeper in debt, getting absolutely nowhere financially, because I was emotionally tied to that property, and being emotionally tied kept me in debt. And even though it saddened me and it ripped my heart out to find homes for my horses, it was the best thing to do, and ultimately got me back on track financially. Now, when I first moved into that little red house, that little red cabin, I had to start over because I had spent every single penny, literally every penny, at the closing. And of course, I didn't tell anybody that. And I didn't tell the seller that I was broke. But I made damn sure that every payment was on time. And I even paid, I believe, $50 extra just to knock it down. And when I found this cabin here, I still had a truck payment, and I hope you can keep up with this. I still had a truck payment, so I did not qualify for a loan for this cabin. But this was seller finance also, and that was how I was able to buy it. So never think just because one thing is holding you back, see it as a temporary obstacle, because there are always ways around obstacles. And there may be things that are not really anything that you really are happy about. But if it gets you past to where you really want to go, then you have to be willing to meet those challenges and be willing to compromise to get what you really want. And I'm not sure if a lot of people want to do that. And I would love to go home to my hometown, Marblehead, Massachusetts, but it is incredibly expensive and way beyond my financial ability. And I know that that is probably never going to happen for me, even though that will always be my home. And so I see so many videos of people who are trying to keep up with their rent, keep up with their mortgage. But there comes a point in time when you have to really look at the hard facts and say, am I emotionally attached to living here, and is it holding me back? Is it keeping me from having a safety net and money in the bank where I can sleep at night? Because I remember that feeling of not being able to sleep at night when I was hanging on to that farm in New Hampshire, completely stressed out, completely bewildered. And every month when I was able to make that payment thinking, okay, I made one more payment, what am I going to do next month? And gosh, what a horrible way to live. It's terrible. Looking back, I should have let that place go a lot sooner. But it is what it is. And if I can pass on what I learned to any of you, living off-grid may not be for you. Living in an RV may not be for you. But if it's a temporary way to get out of a bad situation, I wholeheartedly suggest you take a look at that. Now, the world has changed, and living remotely in an RV is not what it used to. But Perhaps there's a cheaper area where you might want to investigate. Maybe it's not your hometown. Maybe it's not a place that you're familiar with. But why not venture out? Why not look beyond where you do not feel it's in your comfort zone and take a chance and explore those areas that are cheaper, even if it's just temporary. It might put you back on the right track. And especially if you're retiring. I don't know why there's such a push for having so much money, and maybe it's because people want to maintain their present lifestyle. But look at your lifestyle and see if that lifestyle is no longer practical. And perhaps we're emotionally tied to a lifestyle that, realistically speaking, doesn't make sense to keep in our life. So I hope this video helped you, because if I'm able to retire when I was broke, anybody can. And I have been through many hardships, and no, they were not easy. They were very difficult, they were very challenging. Sometimes I cried, such as the time I prayed when I knelt on the sand on the beach. But I know that I was heard, and I knew that my intentions were going to come to fruition, because I've always been like this. So please let me know what your thoughts are, your comments, and if you're trying to retire with very little money or no money, and if you're heavily in debt. I am not a financial advisor, yet I do believe using our common sense can get us far. So thanks so much, everyone. I hope you're all having a really great day. Take care.